Chair, recognize the honourable member for Fox Hill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I want to use this opportunity to address immigration issues in the public domain. The first thing I want to say to the public is that there is no crisis in the Bahamas with regard to immigration. What you see here is a manufactured event by some people whose patriotism and sanity ought to be questioned, and who appear to want to do anything, including mocking God, in order to achieve their ends. What transpired on television from a noted QC borders on blasphemy and mocking God. It is thoroughly shameful, and he ought to be very careful how he takes the Lord's name in vain. It was embarrassing, and everyone knows that Fred Smith QC has only one God, and that is money. I wish to repeat a public statement that was issued from Placencia in Brazil with regard to a decision to release 2 Cuban nationals in the general population of the Bahamas. The release is dated the 19th of February 2016, and it goes as follows. I have noted the decision of the courts with regard to 2 Cuban nationals, Carlos Pupa and Lazaro Sierra. Please take note of the following. The Department of Immigration takes the position that these individuals are a national security risk. We continue to support that position. Those were the clear instructions from our principals at the highest levels to pursue that position. Those instructions did not change and were not changed. I've asked for an investigation then into how a court was persuaded that 2 people that the government believes with cogent evidence are a security risk were released into the general population of the Bahamas. All of our border forces have been notified of the potential risk of these individuals being out in the general community and should be so warned. I expect to present a full report to the House on Wednesday, the 24th of February. And that is the end of the statement. Consistent then with that undertaking, I now wish to provide the House with an explanation of the backstory of this matter further to the press release. In doing so, I wish to also say that arising from what I think is a spurious and insidious and deliberate misinterpretation of what I said, I caused to be written to the Acting Chief Justice Stephen Isaacs yesterday a note which seeks to clarify the statement in the public domain and to say that there was no disrespect intended for the court. Mischief is afoot, says Shakespeare, and there's plenty to go around in this latter matter. I cannot, Mr. Speaker, refer to the matters at hand without dealing with the individuals who perpetrated the specific mischief that I am seeking to address, namely Fred Smith QC, Candia Daines, a Nassau Guardian journalist, and Michael Pintard, the chairman of the FNF. I believe that anyone who knows my association with these individuals would know that it is not beyond conception or belief that what is published from their pens and what is said from their lips is entirely discreditable, given their strange personal animus toward this MP and their total preoccupation, I would argue infatuation, with a personality to the point where, being ignored, they seek to destroy. I pity them all. They must have sad lives indeed. Each of them, in turn, have determined for some reason or another that it is in their political or other interest to misrepresent what I have said and who I am in the hope that they can gain some mileage. Mr. Smith wants to be a politician, but so far has not managed to get anyone to give him a nomination. When one saw the psychological meltdown which took place on television on Monday last, one can understand why. When one examines the range of rash, untrue, false, defamatory, and irresponsible statements that he has made, there is no surprise that he's been rejected by every political party in the country. When one recalls that he urged migrants to flood the country with lawsuits, and in the expectation that the government would be bankrupted, then you're not surprised that people question his patriotism and others question his sanity. With regard to Ms. Daines.
Member for East Grand Bahama.
Corrupt, but it seems that the member is openly criticizing, ascribing motive to a private individual who does not have a right to defend himself in this place. And I just wonder if this is not an abuse of the process.
Very well. Thank you, Honourable Member. Member for Fox Hill, the Chair is inclined to agree with the member for East Grand Bahama in light of the fact that you're making a communication and it appears to be a little bit more personal and to members outside of the place. And that is a bit ultra-virus to our rules.
Mr. Speaker, in the public domain, and I stand to be guided by this, but in the public domain. This particular individual has launched an assault on my integrity at its essence, which affects me and the privileges which I have as a member of Parliament, as a member of the Cabinet. Where else will I defend myself? Where else but in the House of Assembly? The freest forum to do so. Where else?
Member, the House of Assembly is, the chair will recognize you in short order. The House of Assembly is the appropriate place to do so, but there are certain avenues within the House of Assembly that's specific to it, and in statements and communication by ministers, that's not the appropriate time. The chair will recognize member for Marco City.
I'll try to be helpful in this, and I align myself with the comments of the Honourable Member for East End on this matter. I hold no brief for Mr. Smith. In fact, I disagree with a lot of things that he says and does. But our rules are very clear on this, Mr. Speaker. Rule 30, sub-rule 23, makes it very clear that reference shall not be made in debate to the character or conduct of any person except in his official or public capacity. We are able to mention public officials and employees of the government in this House by name, and the convention is clear that their respective ministers are here to respond on their behalf, and if the minister isn't here, there's cabinet responsibility to respond on their behalf. But in terms of mentioning private individuals in this House who have no capacity to respond at this level, it's an infraction of our rules. I'm going to finish in a second. What is not an infraction, if I understand it correctly, is to say that your privilege has been assaulted and to invite the House to appoint a committee to investigate that privilege without impugning in any great degree the integrity of the person whom you are trying to question. So I just say it for completeness, Mr. Speaker. The rules are very clear. No reference shall not be made in debate to the character or conduct of any person except in his official or public capacity. Everything we do here is a debate. And so I think that the member for East End is right, and that we really ought not to go too far with this. While I'm on my feet, I just want to express my gratitude to the member for Fox Hill for clarifying his statement regarding investigation into an outcome of a judicial proceeding. And I'm grateful to hear that communication has been made to the acting Chief Justice to indicate that there was no disrespect intended toward the court. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Honourable Member.
Mr. Speaker,
member for Fox Hill.
That, in fact, demonstrates my point precisely. All of these matters arose in the public domain, not in the House of Assembly. Assaults on my character, assaults on my integrity, the names, the defamatory things that were said about me.
We cannot mention private individuals.
And having now responded to the specific matter that was just mentioned by the Member of Parliament proves my point entirely. It was not raised in here. That was raised outside of the House. That somehow I had breached my responsibilities as a minister and assaulted the court and so on and so forth. It is my responsibility in response to any matter which is made by public policy, and particularly when people attack my integrity, to use the highest forum to respond to that and to say to the Bahamian public, in clear terms, that these individuals who are making these charges ought to be challenged at their essences, because it is a contempt of Parliament what they have done. An absolute and total contempt.
Member for Fox Hill, the chair understands and accepts your point of view. However, the challenge that the chair has is, under statements and communication by ministers, it is clear, according to the rules, that members ought to stay within the bounds of incontrovertible statements or update the House, speak to the policy, speak to the facts, but not personal attacks. We should allow the debate. If there's going to be any personal attacks, one way or the other, it should be done in a debate where there's a response, where members from the other side or another member would have an opportunity to at least confront the issue and confront the findings. And that's really my point. At this phase of the agenda, it is not appropriate to deal with personal attacks. Member for Foxhill.
I'm sorry? I'm going to do what? No, I'm not going to tear up the statement. I'm not going to tear up the statement. What I am intent on doing this morning is to set the record straight, including the motives which drive what is happening here this morning. Inspires it and imputes some improper motive to me. How else am I to defend that? How else am I to defend that? You'll recall, sir, for example, you've made this point about information which can't be controversial. What appeared in the press on Monday, I believe, last, were documents which, in my view, could only have been stolen out of the cabinet. How did they get into the newspaper? And what am I to say to that? My position is misrepresented. How am I to respond to that? By putting two and two together and making it something else that it isn't. It's quite clear, quite clear. And the thing is, Mr. Speaker, I have a history of this with regard to that individual who used those statements, a history of it. Disgusting. The assertion was made that Fred Mitchell, Fred Mitchell, wanted these two Cubans released on parole, but then changed my mind and now claim that they're security risk. That means I lied to the public. That's what she said. So what am I to do? I'm supposed to remain silent. Some people attack my integrity. I'm not supposed to respond to it.
Member yields. The chair recognizes member for Fort Charlotte.
Mr. Speaker, I'm sitting here like everybody else listening to the clear anger and distress on the part of the member for Fox Hill. But it seems to me as though his anger and distress is misdirected. If, in fact, he finds anything particularly objectionable, surely he must speak to his colleagues, the cabinet of which he is a part, to find out why they don't share his view that these individuals are a clear and present threat to the security of this country, because after all, it was the Attorney General's office that did not see fit to object to their release.
Very well. Thank you, Honourable Member.
Anger is misdirected.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Very well. We're not going to
dismiss that. That's
very well.
highly irrelevant.
Yeah, we're not going to take this into the debate.
Irrelevant. I don't even know what you're talking about.
Member, just let's members. Perhaps we need to bring some measure of civility back to this House. Member for Right Honourable Member for Senator.
Mr. Speaker, let me indicate, with respect to this matter, that the matter involves the government of the United States of America, it involves the government of Cuba, and other governments who were consulted on this matter. It was the considered view of the Prime Minister, sufficiently so, and the Cabinet of the Bahamas, that a certain course of action should be taken, and under the signature of the Prime Minister, it was taken. It is a matter, Mr. Speaker, of national security. And it's still outstanding. And it is still outstanding.
Thank you, Right Honourable Member.
So as I explained in the statement, Mr. Speaker, anyone who understands cabinet government would know that the Immigration Board is the cabinet. That's what the statute says. The minister is a delegate for the cabinet. The statute gives the minister responsibility for specific things, mainly work permits and other residency permits. But the ultimate appeal is to the Immigration Board, which is the cabinet. What the minister does is, amongst other things, is develop policy choices for the government, and the government then decides. If they looked at the cabinet paper they would see that the invitation said as follows: authorize the release of the two men with an asylum certificate or otherwise. Well, that's exactly the point. How do you get the cabinet paper? Otherwise. So the statement says, authorize the release, that's what the invitation says, Mr. Speaker. Authorize the release of the two men with an asylum certificate or otherwise. So, what then is the position of the minister in that case? The minister's position is the cabinet should make a choice. In other words, the one option may have been an asylum certificate or otherwise. And it was for the cabinet to determine what course of action should be taken. When I left the Bahamas, Mr. Speaker, to represent the country's prime minister at the heads of government conference in Belize, the instructions from the cabinet and to our lawyers were clear. The men were a national security risk and should not be paroled into the country, and efforts should be made to find a third country to take them. In the meantime, the board was clear. Despite the risk of a threatened lawsuit, the men were to be retained in jail. When the decision was announced, it was quite a shock on my system to find that the lawyers had not offered any resistance whatsoever. It was the view that even if the courts had decided against us, the government's position on the national security risk should have been put to the courts in the country so that the people could know the extraordinary efforts made to protect the population from people who were thought to be a danger. Suddenly, now these wise people are suggesting that because a statement was made by me, that this is somehow an assault on the court. It is typical of those who seek to try and change the story. What I ask, Mr. Speaker, is why does it always end up that people are supporting the views of the rights, so-called, of the foreigners against Bahamians? When are they going to stand up for Bahamians?
This is a communication man.
Well, member for Fortune.
Just to be clear, again, the member for Fox Hill is trying to deceive the Bahamian people. This has nothing to do with choosing foreigners over Bahamians. And please, he ought to be far more responsible in his utterances. The issue here, sir, with the greatest of respect, is why is it that if these individuals were in fact a threat to national security, why did the Attorney General's office not seek to provide an objection to the acting Chief Justice to ask for their continued detention? That was not asked for. So clearly, the individuals of whom they speak were not deemed by the Attorney General's office to be a threat to national security. That is the issue at hand, and he and his government should speak to it.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Well, members, just pause for a second, member for Foxhill. And I'm hearing a little chatter about points of order with statements and communication by ministers, which is extremely odd. It's an oddity. It doesn't exist. It's an oxymoron. But I'm allowing it. You know why I'm allowing it? Because you're being controversial, Honourable Member. And so, in fact, you're abusing the rules. And statements and communications that ought not happen, because when you ask that question, you're insinuating the motives of other side, and that's improper. So the chair cautions you again, member for Fox Hill, desist from these personal attacks or insinuations of other members and stick to policy matters and your statements. That is proper.
Mr. Speaker.
Very well. Member for Fox Hill.
I'm so guided. The fact is that when you look at all of the positions that have been taken by the side opposite with regard to these matters, it ends up with what? What do the facts show? With what? That's the point. What do they show? The imputation is clear. It's clear what they show. It's clear what it shows. Now I want to turn, Mr. Speaker, to the assertions made with regard to the case of some comments made by and allegations made by the chairman of the Free National Movement. In my response, Mr. Speaker, I tried to counsel him as much as I could on this matter of the Cuban nationals and the Bruno Rufa case which he raised. And I suggested to him that he needed only to speak to his colleagues on the opposition bench. His MPs, at least one of them from Grand Bahama, know the story. I spoke to the opposition's principal spokesman on foreign affairs on both matters in the government committee room the last time I attended the House on the 10th of February. I now understand that the Member of Parliament for St. Anne's, the opposition spokesman on foreign affairs, now says I did not have any discussions with him. I insist that I did. I insist. I recall it clearly. I spoke with him in the government committee room, and as he and I entered the House on the 10th of February. And I said the government's position on the Rufa matter and the matter of the Cubans before the courts. Both matters. Now, in making that statement, Mr. Speaker, I didn't say that he agreed with me or didn't agree with me. I didn't say either. What I said is, I said it. These two matters are coming up. This is what is before the courts. This is the government's position.
Member for Long Island.
Stand on behalf of my colleague who is hospitalized actually and is not able to defend himself, and I trust that because he refuted the fact that you had that discussion, that you withdraw those until he returns to this honorable House. Mr. Speaker, he actually said they did not have that discussion. So now it's the member for St. Anne's against the member for Foxhill, and the member for St. Anne's is not here to defend himself. He actually said that that discussion did not take place, and he told me that as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Member for Foxhill, again, this is a controversial matter.
Mr. Speaker.
So the chair has to expunge it. It has to be expunged. It has to be expunged. Because the member did indicate that. The member for Long Island is correct, Honourable Member. The chair has no choice.
So why is this word taken away? Mr. Speaker.
It's not a word. This is statements and communication by ministers. This is not a debate. Member for Kalani.
Leader of the opposition, I'm duty bound to make a comment because I would have spoken to my shadow minister with responsibility for immigration and foreign affairs. And Mr. Speaker, he would have informed me that approximately 2 years ago, the member would have spoken to him about the 2 Cuban individuals who were allegedly involved in the fire at the detention center. And they were subsequently moved to the prison, not because of national security, but for their own security, Mr. Speaker. This was 2 years ago. They were moved for their own security because it was felt that they would have been insulted and probably abused by personnel, or it was also felt that they may have been involved in other fires or damage within the system. Mr. Speaker, he also would have informed me that he would have also informed the given respective minister that there were several pregnant women there and children, and that place was not appropriate for them. And the minister would have engaged the Catholic Church in some respect, and those pregnant women and children would have been removed. Mr. Speaker, that would be in keeping with the November request for the Cuban nationals to be released. Because if they were only in a holding pattern, then they were not of national security. They were in a pattern for their own security, Mr. Speaker. And in retrospect, they would have been a perfect candidate for electronic monitoring. But, Mr. Speaker, this story is completely different. It has nothing to do with national security, and that would be in keeping of his request in November.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Member for Fox Hill.
I have asserted the position in this communication. This is a matter of national security. You heard the statement from the Prime Minister. It is a matter of national security. Now, Mr. Speaker, you've taken the position to expunge what is already in the public domain, that the opposition spokesman for Immigration and Foreign Affairs controverts what clearly happened in this place on the 10th of February. There's no doubt in my mind. No doubt in my mind. And we're not talking about an incident 2 years ago. I'm talking about the 10th of February at 9:30 a.m. in the morning. 2 days later, the press did something in which they said how people were arriving on time to the house. If one wishes to refresh the memory on the point. The 10th of February, I'm not talking about 2 years ago. And that is a fact which I assert. There are two immigration records, the immigration records with regard to these people. I'd like to put them in the public domain. Lazaro Marin. Date of birth, the 12th of August, 1976. Born in Camagüey, Cuba. On the 20th of March, 2013, the person was committed to the detention center along with 9 other Cuban nationals, all of whom were arrested in Camps Bay, Andros. Interviewed by the Refugee Administration, Department of Immigration, and found not to qualify. 11th of July 2013, a deportation order was signed to facilitate his removal from the detention center to Her Majesty's Prison, Department of Corrections, because while at the detention center he actively participated in ongoing commotions with intelligence reports marking the subject as a principal instigator and disruptor. Because of the activities and his previous service in the Cuban military, he was considered a flight risk, and therefore he was transferred to Her Majesty's Prison, the Department of Corrections, a more secure facility. He was an alien resident of the United States since 1994. He did not, therefore, qualify for refugee status. On the 12th of August 2013, a diplomatic note was sent to the Cuban authorities requesting that he be allowed to return to Cuba. He was also on a list dated the 26th of August 2013 asking that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs seek assistance in returning him to the U.S. He was not allowed to return to either country. On the 8th of July 2014, in a subsequent report, it is noted that the subject has a criminal record in the United States which hindered his eligibility to re-enter, and that record was also a barrier to UNHCR assisting in a third country resettlement. Carlos Cooper Mendoza. Date of birth, 14th of January 1971. Place of birth, Latunas, Cuba. On the 18th of August 2000, subject came to the department's attention when he was arrested along with a group of 6 other Cuban nationals. There is no record of where he was arrested and by whom. There is no profile on the subject as he escaped custody on his way to the detention center on the same day of his arrest. On the 17th of August 2007, he was arrested by the RBDF and turned over to immigration. He was in possession of a Florida's driver's license and a U.S. alien resident card. He was repatriated to the U.S. on the 21st of August 2007 and placed on the Immigration Department's restricted list. On the 13th of May 2013, the subject was arrested at Sandy Point, Abaco by the police and charged by the department with illegal landing at the Magistrates Court, Marsh Harbor. He was fined $300 or served 3 months. Her Majesty's Prison and the Department of Corrections, the fine was paid. He was set to be repatriated to the U.S. However, the U.S. withdrew their support and denied the repatriation. He was sent to Nassau instead and committed to the detention center. 24th of June 2013, a deportation order was signed to facilitate his removal from the detention center to Her Majesty's Prison, Department of Corrections, because while in the detention center, he incited an uprising and attempted to escape. Therefore, he was transferred to Her Majesty's Prison, Department of Corrections, a more secure facility. On the 12th of August 2013, A diplomatic note was sent to the Cuban authorities requesting that he be allowed to return to Cuba. He was also on a list 26th of August 2013 asking that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs seek assistance in returning him to the U.S. He was not allowed to return to either country. All right. Since 2013, I have spoken to the President of Panama, the Vice President of Panama, the Foreign Minister of Sweden, personally about the possibility of taking these people in so that they could be released from the prison and sent on their way. To no avail. In the first instance, we asked, and I personally asked the U.S. authorities in the Bahamas whether they would be welcomed back in the United States. As recently as our monthly meeting earlier this year, the subject was revisited and the answer was no, because they had a criminal history in the United States. Their permanent residence certificates for the U.S. had expired and they would not be welcomed back. We met similar resistance from the Cuban government, who indicated that as they had left Cuba and were residents of the United States, they were not welcome in Cuba. Our Prime Minister insisted in the cabinet discussions that we should exhaust all efforts home. The letter was personally delivered to Cuba by the Minister of Tourism and Member of Parliament for West Grand Bahama and Bimini. We are still awaiting a response. As recently as the meeting of CELAC last month in Ecuador, where I represented the Prime Minister, I spoke to this matter with the Foreign Minister of Cuba, Bruno Rodriguez Perea, and he said that the matter was still under review. The matter had been raised previously with him a few days earlier at the ACS meeting in Haiti, where he again said the matter was under review. Both these meetings took place this year. In those circumstances, it was then that Fred Smith came to the courts to file an action to release these individuals. And the idea here, Mr. Speaker, appears to be pick easy wins and then claim legal costs against the government. So the courts are being used to make money while giving the impression that this is about human rights. Our position remains that they are security risks. We do not want them here and they should leave. I was also asked to speak one more time to the Americans, which I did directly to the Chargé by telephone the day after their release, because Mr. Smith had represented that these two men, upon their release, would be handed over to their families and would then be returned to the United States. The Chargé assured me they were not welcome in the United States, but their border authorities and the headquarters in Washington, D.C. had been notified that the men had been released and were likely to try and smuggle their way back into the U.S., and they should be stopped and sent back. He indicated their suspicion was that they would seek to make their way to one of our northern islands and then smuggle their way across the Gulf Stream, and their naval forces were asked to be on alert for that possibility. Mr. Speaker, given the note of assurance from the QC, one wonders whether the position was deliberately misrepresented, and could there have been some collusion with these men to get them out of prison, reckless and closing one's eyes to the possible risk of them smuggling themselves back into a friendly country, and then the Bahamas be seen to be part of that collusion. Would that not form the grounds for some kind of report to the Bar Association about the conduct of that person? Is that a fair imputation to make? I leave the matter there. In the statement, Mr. Pintard, the chairman of the FNF, said that through my arrogance, I had challenged the courts on the matter of Bruno Rufa and his stay in the Bahamas. Again, Mr. Pintard does not understand. And there was a judgment, Mr. Speaker, with regard to the matter of Bruno Rufa. And there are varying interpretations about what that judgment means. There are, from the Immigration Department's point of view, with regard to this individual, there are serious complaints on file with respect to his conduct in Freeport. There is, in fact, now a lawsuit against a Bahamian who is alleged to have repeated various statements about causing threats of death, and Mr. Rufa has now filed a lawsuit against that person. Bahamians stop me in the road and complain about threats made to their livelihood by him, and according to them, boast of having immigration in his back pockets so no one can do anything to him, and that the court's actions will be stretched out until the PLP loses office and he will be safe. Those are the reports. I indicated in a public interview on the 22nd of February that immigration does not only act based on convictions, but also has to rely necessarily on credible intelligence. In addition, one must assume that the Immigration Department acts according to law and acts rationally. This is not, the Department of Immigration, Mr. Speaker, is not the picture of an arbitrary and whimsical agency that Fred Smith is seeking to portray. Our position is that in law, the Department of Immigration has the absolute discretion to say who can land and not land in the Bahamas, may refuse the leave to land, may cancel the leave that is granted at any time for any reason and for no reason, provided that person is not a Bahamian or a permanent resident. Mr. Rufer at the time had the status of a visitor, and the leave was canceled, and he was escorted by invitation out of the country last year on the 18th of February 2015. The only reason he is still here is because we have been ordered to allow him to stay here by the courts. The courts. We honor the court's orders. Otherwise, he would be gone. Following his expulsion from the Bahamas, he then sought Mr. Fred Smith, QC, who put up an arguable case to the courts that now seems to suggest that what happened to Mr. Rufer was an unlawful deportation, and that every case of expelling someone from the Bahamas, including a visitor, requires a deportation order, and that the person ought to be brought before a court. To be frank, one had never heard of this. We believe that it is wrong in law, and the comments made about that in the judgments may not have been strictly necessary to the decision. But that is a call and argument for lawyers. What we know is that this man is not a Bahamian, and we do not want him in the Bahamas. We are fighting all of the cases in the country which he has filed. As recently as the 17th of February, we received this complaint from one of the condo owners associations. Mr. Speaker, I will not call the name of the foreign residents because I'm advised that people are afraid. They report that he has been bullied into paying the fees of the lawyers for this defense, as high as $200,000. And part of the reason we wrote the letter, which has also made it into the public domain, to the owners of these condos in Freeport, who gathered, for example, to show support in a public demonstration outside a court for him, is to indicate to them that they need not be afraid. Nothing in the Rufer matter touches or concerns their individual cases, and they have no obligation to pay legal fees. But the report to immigration is that people are being intimidated, both workers and condo owners. And as recently as Saturday last, I received a phone call of complaint again about these bullying tactics. The interesting thing, though, Mr. Speaker, is this. The judge's decision and the position of the F&M chairman on Mr. Rufer is that, about the comments and the position of the F&M chairman, is that in 2007, following complaints to the then Minister O.A.T. Turnquest and the then Prime Minister Hubert Ingram, Mr. Rufer was arrested for working without a work permit, similar to what happened in this case, for which he is now before the courts in the Bahamas. And while no charges were brought in 2007, he was escorted out of the country by immigration using the same procedure out of the country on the 21st of September 2007. The same procedure. 2007. The same procedure that was used last year. So where was Mr. Smith in the Tribune, or is it now only because the Progressive Liberal Party is in power? Now, these allegations have been made, Mr. Speaker, in the public domain by someone who uses publicity, has made comments about the Department of Immigration, comparing them to the Nazi Gestapo, and makes comments about how we used to be connected together, and he knows why we are no longer connected together. Went on a public platform and called for a bloody revolution. I part company with any acts or, I'm sorry? Irrelevancies again. Anyway, immigration maintains. Well, the latest thing, Mr. Speaker, and forgive me I'm probably violating your rule again, but you know, when a fella gets down on his knees and prays for evil, that surely must be mocking God. Surely must be mocking God, and God will not be mocked. Immigration maintains, Mr. Speaker, that consistent with the powers of the directive immigration, to cancel the leave of a visitor at will, that visitor can have a choice. He can either be arrested, detained, and face charges, or he can be allowed to leave on his own steam, simply escorted to the airport and out. Often it is a better choice because the theory is it preserves the position that the person is not put on the stop or restricted list. This, Mr. Speaker, is the man that the chairman of the FNM is defending. That, Mr. Speaker, is the best, to the best of my knowledge, information, and belief, as I stand advised, the position on these two matters. I need go no further. I hope that the Bahamian people see for themselves how my obligations and duties and that of the department have been discharged in these matters. And I hope that the usual suspects who are piling on to defend the interests will now see the light and no longer protect people who are who may be seeking to smuggle themselves back into the United States of America or boasting that they have our institutions in our back pocket. Into the mix, Mr. Speaker, they've tried to throw everything and the kitchen sink as the election gets closer. The facts speak, however, for themselves. They shame their country, their profession in doing what they've done. And I admit to nothing more than doing my job without fear or favor. If these people hate the country and everything is wrong with the country, there's a choice. You can leave. The gentleman who makes the allegation has a citizenship of origin. You could go and occupy that citizenship again if you wish. It's a choice open to you. Finally, I wish to address those who support the Progressive Liberal Party and those who support the protection of the borders generally. And one thing I must say, Mr. Speaker, and I want to make this clear, immigration is not and has not, up to this point, been a political matter. You will remember, Mr. Speaker, when this matter was first raised about the new immigration rules, the leader of the opposition joined with the government and said that the opposition spokesman should be in touch with me as the policy developed, and we would work together on this. And why was that? Because their polling told them that across the board, this policy of the Progressive Liberal Party has 99% acceptance in this country. So I say to everybody, the true-blooded Bahamians, the patriotic Bahamians, who support the protection of the borders of the Bahamas, stay strong. I am strong. I am neither fazed or bothered or persuaded by all of these mischaracterizations, protests, and phony prayers. I have a job to do. I shall continue to do it for the Bahamian people. I shall do it all the way. And God bless the Commonwealth of the Bahamas.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you, Honourable Member. Order that the communication be brought up.
Mr. Speaker.
Very well. Order that the communication do lie on the table. Shall recognize member for Kalani.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I cannot sit here and allow the reputation of the Free National Movement to be sullied or besmirched. A comment was made, Mr. Speaker, about Bruno Rufo. I do not know this young man, and my colleagues in Grand Bahama has no dealings with him. A statement was made by the minister that Bruno Rufo said that once the government is changed, then he will be straight, something to that effect. I want the record to reflect, Mr. Speaker, that once the government is changed, and it will be changed, that we will uphold the law. We will show no favoritism for anyone. We will uphold and enforce the law. So we would like that statement to be clarified, Mr. Speaker. The FNM is not like that.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Member for Marco City.
Mr. Speaker, I understand that we're not in the middle of a debate, but this issue is of such importance, and it's such a fundamental fabric of our nation. I think it's important for the public to know where various parties stand on this. And I just want to make sure that the public is aware that the United Democratic Party aligns itself completely with the idea spelled out in Section 41C of the Immigration Act, that if at any time after a person other than a citizen or a permanent resident has landed in the Bahamas, it shall come to the knowledge of the minister that such person is a person whose presence in the Bahamas would, in the opinion of the board, be undesirable and not conducive to the public good, the minister may make an order requiring such person to leave the Bahamas, a deportation order. There cannot be any doubt about that. That is a fundamental prerequisite of any democracy. And whatever differences we may have in terms of politics, we should not undermine the fabric of our nation. There's no doubt, however this started, with immigration, deportation, and so on, the fundamental statement that the cabinet needs to have the power and be recognized as having the power of removing people from the country who are not citizens or permanent residents has to be upheld. And so I don't want there to be any differences on that. I don't want the public to perceive any differences on that. Fundamental to our democracies, we must defend our borders and we must defend our people. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Member for Foxhill.
I just want to thank the member for his statement. What I do want to do, and perhaps the member and the member's offices, because the Attorney General's office and the Law Reform Commissioner have been engaged now in reviewing the Immigration Act even further as a result of the decisions which have been taken by the courts. Because, as I said in the statement, heretofore, it was believed that the Department of Immigration had that choice which they could offer someone who was landed once the leave was canceled, which is you could invite the person to leave instead of making a formal deportation order, because of the fact that if the person withdraws voluntarily and is seen out of the country, it preserves the possibility for him to return without having to deal with being on the restricted or stop list. And that's been the procedure that has been used up to now. If the courts are now saying that that procedure is no longer available, you see the knock-on effects that that has across the whole system. And so it may be that we have to again look at further reforming the law to make it clear that that possibility exists. Bahamians would, for example, have the experience of going to the pre-clearance lounge here, and when you enter, they have a similar provision in the law. They will give you an opportunity to withdraw your application to enter, as opposed to them giving a record of your having been expelled. And so that's a clarification I want to give.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Member for East Grand Bahama.
Just want to seek a little bit of, or to hopefully add a little bit of clarification, because there seemed to be a statement attributed to the Senator Pintard that does not necessarily comport with what was written. And I want to make sure that it is clear what he wrote in respect to this matter, particularly with respect to Bruno Rufo. And I'm quoting from an article that was in the newspapers. And this is in the case of Bruno Rufo, the court declared that the Canadian expat had been unlawfully detained and deported by Mitchell's immigration officers. The minister's response was to suggest amendments to the law that would bypass the ruling and allow for arbitrary expulsion to continue, a clear violation of international norms and a slap in the face of the presiding judge. In the case of the 2 Cuban men freed last week after spending 3 years incarcerated without legal justification, the minister decided to publicly brand them a national security risk after the courts had declared them free and innocent in the eyes of the law. The point being, Mr. Speaker, that we on this side have no right information to question whether they are national security risks or not. The government will make that decision. The point, though, is that the court has made a ruling. And our position is simply that if there is a question as to the ruling of the court, then there is a procedure for that. And certainly the suggestion that there ought to be, the courts ought to be investigated are certainly contrary to good governance. Finally, Mr. Speaker,
members, allow the member to finish.
Just before I sit, Mr. Speaker, I'd just like to clarify one more time for the government. The Free National Movement, and certainly this member, speaking for myself, born here, bred here, grew up here. And so for anybody to suggest that I am less than patriotic and concerned about the well-being of Bahamians and of this country is an absolute insult, and we should all take offense to that. That, Mr. Speaker, is uncalled for, because it is our duty as elected members here to question. And because we question, should not be extended to mean that we are somehow taking the cause of a foreign entity or foreign person. We are questioning the procedure, Mr. Speaker. And so I want everybody to be clear on that. And these personal motives that are ascribed to people are really not becoming, Mr. Speaker, and we ought to be able to be above that.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Member for Fox Hill, final response.
Again, I tried as best I could to explain in great detail what this is about and how the decisions were made. With respect to this allegation again being made, if you carefully look at the statement and read the statement, I'm not talking at all about the courts, nothing to do with the courts. Nothing to do with the courts. I'm going to say it slowly. Nothing to do with the courts.
Repeat about 10 times if you would put a stick in. Thank you, Honourable Member. Member for Charlotte, and then the Right Honourable Member for Centerville, and we're going to move on.
Yes, sir. Final statement on this.
For Charlotte.
The member for Fox Hill has opened the door ascribing negative motives to the opposition in terms of us not being patriotic. The member for Fox Hill said, and I quote, "I am proud to do my job without fear or favor. I have a job to do to protect our borders, and I will continue to do it all the way." The fact is, Mr. Speaker, since March of 2014, I think this is important and pertinent to what we discussed. Since March of 2014, the Minister, in his responsibility for Foreign Affairs and Immigration, has been asked by the press to provide details relating to the investigation of a scam involving the sale of visas to Haitian nationals to enter our country. Since March of 2014, notwithstanding the relentless questioning by the press, the member for Fox Hill has not provided details about the conclusions of those investigations. And if he is sincere in his stated position that this government is patriotic in protecting our borders, it is high time that the member and his side convey to the Bahamian people what the findings of those investigations have been, and if so, to let the chips fall where they may without fear or favor.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Member for Fox Hill.
Fellow he was too busy. He was too busy in Long Island last week. Now he must be tired.
We're going to speak. Member, in your response, I would rather your response not invoke another response. Well, but the chair is going to allow the Right Honourable Member for Centerville to respond afterwards, and then we're going to move on. Yeah. Member for Fox Hill.
He's no, you're having fun. No, you're having fun. I understand. You're having fun. Have a good time. No, having fun.
Good, have a good time, man. Party in the backyard. Party in Loretta's backyard. And, you know, what is it? What goes on in the party stays in the party, right? First of all, Mr. Speaker, in response to that, this is another red herring. All of the things that he's asked for already in the public domain. I'm not going to revisit that. That's designed again for, you know, the managing editor to pick a good headline out of this disaster for them this morning. So good luck to you. Good luck.
Thank you, Honourable Member.